Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the IndieZone. My name is Kathy. We are continuing on. This is part 3 of a word-for-word reading from the 175-page transcript of the closed and sealed hearing, January 3rd, 2025, dealing with the motion to suppress IgG evidence. We go to the bottom of page 37. We will note here that Rylene Nolan has been called to the stand, and after some niceties after being sworn in, Ms. Taylor asks her on direct, line 25, "How are you employed?" Going into page 38, she responds, line 1, "Answer, I am employed as a forensic laboratory manager with the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Laboratory in Meridian, Idaho." Question, how long have you worked for the Idaho State Police Forensics Laboratory? Answer, I have worked for Idaho State Police Forensic Services since November 2002. Question, did you have prior experience similar? Answer, prior to my employment with ISP, I did not. Question, how were you trained for your job? Answer, I have formal education. I was originally hired as a forensic scientist in the biology DNA unit. As such, I was required to have a degree in biology, biochemistry, or similar. I was required to have coursework in genetics, molecular biology, biochemistry, and statistics. And then I completed the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Specialized Training Program in biology screening, as well as in DNA analysis, as well as in DNA database analysis. And then I've completed hundreds of hours of continuing education over my years. Are you a member of any professional organization? Yes, ma'am, she responds. And then we go into page 40. Which ones? I am a member of the Northwest Association of Forensic Scientists, the American Association of Forensic Scientists, and the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors. Question, are you part of a collaborative? Answer, yes, I am a member of the National Technology and Validation Implementation Collaborative. 10, what is that one about? 11A, answer, that is a group comprised of laboratory management. Typically, it depends on which portion or subsection of the collaborative that have gathered together to generate ideas for best practices and guidelines for new technologies coming into forensics. Question, would investigative genetic genealogy be a new technology coming into forensics? Answer, line 19, that is one of the technologies. However, our group refers to it as FIGG, Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy. Question, FIGG. Okay, I'll try to remember that. That's the one I want to talk about today. So your group is talking about best practices for FIGG. Is that right? It's bottom of page 39 into 40. Line 1, that's one of our areas of focus, correct. Are you doing that because there are practices that are important in that discipline? Answer, we are doing that because it's a new technology coming into the forensics world, and not every laboratory manager has a background in DNA. We also have a group on firearms because not every laboratory manager has a background in firearms. And it's just a resource for those managers as they're looking to implement new technologies. Question, you mentioned best practices. Does that have anything to do with things that I might refer to as standards or procedures or protocols? Answer, no. Question, what does best practices mean? Answer, best practices is a recommendation based on the current knowledge in the field. There are organizations that come up with standards for different fields, but this group, that is not their purpose. Question, in your lab, do you have standards and procedures and protocols? Answer, our laboratory does have. We call them, quote, analytical methods, as well as our, quote, quality system. We're now going into the next page, page 41. Question, Analytical methods and quality systems mean the same thing as procedures and protocols. Answer, yes. Question, what does that mean to you? Answer, what that means to me, our laboratory is an accredited laboratory, so we have a set of accreditation standards that we must meet. In order to do that, we have set quality policies as well as the analytical methods for each discipline. That ensures that we are consistently performing our scientific analysis in a way that has been validated and shows to be proper for the testing that's being conducted. And it also shows that we are meeting the national standards by which we are accredited. In addition, DNA has additional standards that they must meet, calling the FBI's quality assurance standards for forensic casework laboratories, as well as for forensic databasing laboratories. We're at page 41, line 20. Ms. Taylor is continuing to conduct a direct examination of Rylene Nolan of the Idaho State Police. Question, I want to start with the first part of it. You mentioned, I think, that there's standards and protocols, my definition of them, that helps assure your work so that somebody could look and see what you did and maybe get the same result or understand what you did. We're going now into page 42, line 1. Do I understand that right, Ms. Taylor? Asks Ms. Nolan here. Answer, yes. It's the methods we follow, and yes, that would be one application someone would look at and see what we did. Question from Ms. Taylor on direct of Rylene Nolan. Now you mentioned at the very end of what you told me before, DNA has something separate. Answer, correct. Question, what do you mean? Answer, because our laboratory is a participant in the National DNA Index System, it's commonly referred to as CODIS, which stands for Combined DNA Index System, and are subject to the additional standards set forth by the FBI because they manage that database. Question by Ms. Taylor, what are those standards? Answer by Ms. Nolan. Those standards are known as the QA standards. They cover everything from when I listed the classes I had at the beginning. They decide what classes a DNA analyst coming in should have, what education a DNA technical leader should have, what things need to be included in a validation study, how facilities need to be controlled. It covers the gamut of testing. Question, validation study. What does that mean? Then we go into the top of page 43. Answer, whenever a new chemistry, a new instrument, a new procedure is coming online in the laboratory, we perform a study to ensure that the chemistry, instrument, or procedure is working or receiving the expected result. Question, okay, and to be sure, you have to do that because you use CODIS? Answer, our DNA section has to do that because we use CODIS. The rest of the laboratory because of part of our accreditation standards. Question, tell me what CODIS is briefly. Answer, CODIS Combined DNA Index System is essentially a national DNA database. It exists on 3 levels. There's a local level, your county sheriff's office, local PDs. There's a state level, which is typically the state laboratory. It is limited to public laboratories, and then the national level. In Idaho, the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Lab in Meridian is the only DNA lab in the state. So there are no local labs in the state of Idaho. And the database contains different indexes. There's a forensic index. Those are profiles obtained from items of evidence. There's an offender index. There are samples from those convicted of qualifying offenses in your state as determined by, and this is the end of 43, into page 44, ladies and gentlemen, your state legislature. If your state legislature allows arrestees, there's an arrestee index. There's also a missing persons index and 4 remains. Question, and we're at line 4. Do you have any special role with the CODIS database? Answer, currently, I'm a CODIS user. That is my only role at the moment. Question: what was your role in the fall, November of 2022? Now, this, she's asking, ladies and gentlemen, what was your role in the fall, November of 2022? This was, of course, at the time when the crimes occurred. So Ms. Taylor is querying Ms. Nolan as to what her role was at that important specific time period relative to this case. She says, in the past, have you in the past? In the past, I have served as the alternate state administrator for Idaho. Question: for CODIS DNA, that goes into CODIS. What kind of profile is used? Answer: if I'm understanding the question correctly, there's different types of DNA profiles. And what goes into CODIS is known as an STR profile, or short tandem repeat. This is an important term that we have heard before in this case many, many times in DNA field. STR, that's a profile. It's called short tandem repeat. And we're now on line 23, page 45, with Ms. Taylor on direct examination asking, what kind of information is in a short tandem repeat, or STR? Answer: can I give a brief explanation about DNA? She goes into the next page. This is line number 1. Question: sure. Answer: so DNA is a substance that's found in the cells of our body. It acts as a blueprint. It tells our bodies what form to take and how to function. Between individuals, it is over 99% the same. That is why we all have the same basic structure and our bodies function in basically the same way. In forensics and in STRs, we are targeting that less than 1% that is unique to an individual, with the exception of identical twins, and so areas of DNA that vary widely because individuals don't code for anything typically. So it doesn't tell us anything about a person. When I look at an STR profile, I can tell you if that person is genetically male or genetically female, and that is all. Line 19, page 45, continues with Ms. Taylor on direct examination, asking, do you know what an S as in Sam, N as in Nancy, P as in Peter profile is? SNP. Answer: I do. Question: what is that? Answer: an SNP profile is a single nucleotide polymorphism. So you're looking at a single nucleotide, whereas the STR is a series of repeating nucleotides, a specific repeat that we're looking for. This is the bottom of page 45, now going into 46. Question: the SNP then, is that a closer look at a person's genome? Answer: I would like to state that I'm not an expert in SNPs. I'm not qualified in the SNP technology and have not ever been qualified in the SNP technologies. With STRs, depending on the chemistry, you're looking at anywhere from 13 to 25 plus locations. With SNPs, my understanding is in general, you're looking at a minimum of 10,000. Question: what does that mean? There's more information about a human contained in an SNP than there is in an STR profile. Line 13, Mr. Nye now is interjecting a comment. Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. This witness is not disclosed as an expert, and she just testified she's not an expert in SNP technology. So this is Mr. Nye interjecting an objection on Ms. Taylor's line of questioning of Rylene Nolan here. The court: I appreciate that with respect to her answer, and I will take that into account in the event the defense intends to rely on that testimony. I took it as a sort of background about her general knowledge. I'll allow it for now. I'm not taking it as expert testimony about the SNP beyond the basic understanding of what SNP is. So he is overruling Mr. Nye's objection here. Ms. Taylor says, thank you. Line 25, do you remember my question? And then we go into the next page, 47. Answer, yes. I would answer if you're looking at a larger part of the human genome, then you would be getting into a larger amount of information about someone. Question, I have one more question about CODIS, and then I want to move into a different area. You mentioned that there's 4 indexes and you talked about a forensic index. Answer from Ms. Nolan, correct. Question, what is that one used for? Answer, the forensics index is where profiles generated from items of evidence can be uploaded. There are rules about what can be uploaded, though. It cannot match someone known to be a victim of a crime. It cannot match someone whose DNA should be in a place outside of a crime being committed. It cannot be anything taken directly from a suspect of a crime where you would reasonably assume their DNA would be present. It must be related to a crime, and it must be believed to be from the putative perpetrator of that crime. Line 22, we're continuing on. This is the bottom of page 47, direct examination of Rylene Nolan by Ms. Taylor, who asks, so, if I understand it, you use DNA, get an STR, and only under certain circumstances can you use CODIS. Do I understand that right? Answer, correct. And this is the bottom of page 47, going into 48. Okay. Outside of CODIS, and I understand that that does, if you create a profile, a DNA profile of somebody, is that a separate thing you do in your lab, even if you're not going to run them through CODIS? Answer, yes. When we receive items of evidence or samples from known individuals, we generate a DNA profile from those. Question, did you become involved in the homicides in Moscow from 2022? Answer, involved as the manager of the laboratory in Meridian. I haven't actually done any work on any evidence in the case or issued any reports. Question, all right. Is it fair to say you did not go to the residence then? 17, line 17A, correct. Question, as the lab manager, do you understand about what evidence has come into the lab from that case? Answer, there was a lot of evidence submitted. I have a general knowledge of items that have come in, but I could not provide you with a detailed list off the top of my head. Line 25, this is the bottom of page 49. Ms. Taylor says that's okay, I won't ask you to. Line 1, next page, thank you. Question, as a lab manager, are you aware of different bits of testing that were done related to this case? Answer, in general, yes. Question, are you aware of a profile called unknown male A as an apple? Answer, yes. Question, where did that come from? Answer, to my recollection, unknown male A came from a swab taken from a knife sheath that was submitted by Moscow Police Department. Question, are you aware of unknown male B? Answer, I believe that was another sample from hearing the previous testimony. That was from in the house. Now, she is referring to previous testimony. It appears she's referring to Brett Payne's testimony because he is the only person who testified before her. And at the beginning of the hearing, the court didn't sequester the witnesses, didn't have the witnesses wait outside until they came in. He had them all sitting in the room. And this, quite frankly, was a question that I had in the open hearing because I saw Detective Payne sitting in the gallery and I thought, okay, well, he must have testified in the morning. Maybe he's just staying to listen. But then he was called back on the stand again. So this appears as to what she's saying, that she, from her, from what she knows from who testified earlier, would be Detective Payne. Now, Ms. Taylor clarifies. Question, line 17, I would only want you to testify from your own base of memory. Answer, from my own memory, I don't recall exactly where B was from. This is this male sample B that she's being asked about, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Taylor responds, fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Are you aware that investigative genetic genealogy or forensic investigative genetic genealogy was used in this case? That's the bottom of 49. We're going into 50. Line 1, yes. What was your role in that? Answer, my role specific to this case was facilitating the signing of a memorandum of understanding, making sure all parties received it and had signed it. Those parties being the police agency, the prosecuting attorney's office, as well as a member of ISP's management team. And when the preliminary report was received, my job was to look over it, ensure that it had all the required pieces, the report, and then to authorize payment of the invoice for that testing. So when we see here memorandum of understanding, an MOU, it's sometimes referred to, basically so that everybody signs it, everybody's on the same page, a memorandum of understanding amongst the signatories to that document, ladies and gentlemen. Now we're going to continue on to line 13. Question, what role did you have with the laboratory that was going to perform the FIGG work? Answer from Ms. Nolan, as far as how we came to be in contact with them. So when ISP decided to pursue a contract with the laboratory, she continues here, that could perform the S&P testing that we talked about earlier, we're a state agency. So we don't just get called up anybody and hire them, as we had to go through a bid process. So part of my role was developing the scope of work for that invitation to bid, as in what we expected the vendor to perform. And then when the bids came in, I was involved in the team that evaluated the documents that were submitted, and then ultimately the division of purchasing determined who won the bid. This is now going on to the next page. So what she's describing here is something that we see very often with public agencies. Sometimes private organizations will too. They'll go out, they'll advertise an invitation to bid in various organizations, whatever they do, whatever they specialize in. If they feel that they meet the qualifications as to what is being put out to bid, they'll go ahead and submit. And it seems like she's saying here, Ms. Rylene is saying here, she was part of the team that sort of went through the applications, but it was ultimately, she's saying here, the division of purchasing made the final decision as to who won the bid. Line 2, did Idaho State Police Forensics have a contract with this laboratory? Othram. Answer, they were the winning bid through their process, and so they were under contract with the Department of Purchasing. Correct. Question, is the contract with the Department of Purchasing that you perform these services and we pay you for them essentially, or does it have more meat to it to talk about some of the things that you were talking about, how you helped develop, I guess, the job description and what would be required? Answer, I'm really not familiar with the Department of Purchasing day-to-day operations or how they operate. My role was strictly developing that scope of work. We expect them to develop the profiles that can be uploaded into the public genealogy databases. We expect them to provide us with a written report. We expect the report to contain certain things, to have a header, to have a date, to list the case number, to have page number, those types of things. So she's talking here about what it appears, at least in my opinion, is here we're learning that the contract had to do with sending these profiles to Othram, and then they would upload them onto genealogy databases and then report back and have to do it in a structured way. A date in a certain place, subject line, and so forth. Line 22, question. Outside that description of the scope of work and the requirements, did your lab have a separate contract with Othram that basically said, you agree to do these things? We now go on to page 53. Answer from Rylene Nolan. We had that they won the bid from Division of Purchasing, and that's the state contract for performing that work. Question. You mentioned a memorandum of understanding you helped facilitate to be signed by the parties. Was Othram one of the parties that signed them? Answer, no. This is a memorandum between the law enforcement agencies, the prosecuting attorney's office, and the lab. Question, and in that memorandum of understanding that indicated that the interim Department of Justice, the Department of Justice interim policy applied, is that right? Answer, I believe it did. I don't have the exact text memorized. Question, if I showed you a copy of that memorandum of understanding, would that help you remember if that was part of it? Answer yes. Question, Your Honor, if I have just a moment to gather that, it's not being offered up as an exhibit. The court, just refreshing, Ms. Taylor, it's to aid her memory. The court, show it to the state counsel. So now we go on to page 54 by Ms. Taylor. Question, does looking at that refresh your memory as to whether the Department of Justice interim policy applied? Answer, it does say in the first paragraph that it did apply, Ms. Taylor. And, Your Honor, I'm going to refer to Defense Exhibit D as in David 19, ladies and gentlemen, here, and ask the witness be shown that, and then I'll provide it to the court by copy. Court, when was this filed? Ms. Taylor, that would have been filed with the amended Franks memorandum on the bottom of that page. I'm sorry. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we're learning that at least one exhibit that's being used here, or that Ms. Taylor wants to use, came from the sealed Franks exhibits that were filed back in November when the defense was looking for a Franks hearing. Of course, we know at this point that the court did deny that motion for a Franks hearing, but we're starting to learn details here that we never, as the public, were privy to before. The court says, I've got thousands of filings. I have to go by date to find things. Ms. Taylor, I think it was November 18th or 20th. That's when they submitted. They had to submit an amended submission for their Franks hearing. It was the first submission that they sent, ladies and gentlemen. You'll recall the court rejected because it wasn't specific enough. It didn't have the details to it. It was repetitive information. If you can go back and look at the court order from that time, but this is what they're talking about, that filing, that amended filing in November of 2024. Ms. Taylor, I think it was November 18th or 20th. At the bottom of that page, however, you can see some numbers in red, and those were the numbers to make it easier to find the court. I just need to find it in this computer first. All right, I found it in my printed documents by Ms. Taylor. Question, is that the Department of Justice interim policy? Going on to the next page, answer yes, the Department of Justice interim policy on forensic, genetic, genealogical, DNA analysis and searching. Wow, that is quite the title. And we're at the top of page 54. Question, and in section 7, I believe it's section 7 or page 7. Answer, quote, investigative caution, that section? Question, let me ask you this question. Are you familiar with the provision in that policy that says, if there's a prosecution case, and if somebody is arrested and there's a prosecution case, all items in the forensic, investigative, genetic genealogy should be preserved for court purposes? Answer, I believe that is part of, I don't think it's in the section 7. It might be, but I believe it's part of preserving. Question, okay, what I want to know is, what did Othram preserve? I don't know, she responds. Question, what did you get back? Answer, we received a preliminary report. In other cases, we will sometimes get back the DNA extract that was sent to them, and I don't recall if we got that back in this case. Anything our laboratory receives, we return to the submitting agency. This is the bottom of page 54. We're ending here at line 24. We're going to come back to conclude with Ms. Nolan's testimony, but we certainly are learning a lot of information here regarding the ISP's involvement. They were on the scene at 1122 King Road rather early after Moscow Police Department made the horrendous findings that they did, and they were there. They were helping to process the crime scene. So we're going to continue on with Ms. Nolan's direct examination by Ms. Taylor, lead counsel for the defense at this time. This will now conclude this episode, special multi-part episode, where we're evaluating the transcript from the January 23rd, 2025 hearing that was just released today, the 21st of February 2025. This is Kathy. Thank you for joining us here today.